Hello, I'm Horace Douty in Lexington, Virginia, and each week I bring you a local history lesson, and I have written these lessons in 2 volumes of History Lessons from a Country Church by Horace Douty. These books are available in Downtown Books in Lexington or Amazon or the Bookery in Lexington if you wish to purchase them. And each book simply tells stories about people of Lexington, Virginia long ago. I encourage you to share these lessons with your family and your friends. Click on like, click on subscribe, and click on the little bell icon that tells you when they come on. Today, the history lesson is entitled, John Preston Met His Match. John Thomas Lewis Preston was accustomed to having his way. He was big, he was handsome, he was intelligent, highly educated, and wealthy. He grew up in an environment where people accepted the idea that the man of the house was without question the monarch and master. However, a small woman named Maggie Junkin brought about a change in John and in his world of 19th century Lexington, Virginia. Born in 1811, John had a privileged childhood. His parents sent him to a prep school in Richmond, where his close friend was Edgar Allan Poe. His quest for formal education brought him back to Lexington, where he graduated from Washington College. And John also completed postgraduate work at the University of Virginia and Yale before settling in his hometown of Lexington as a lawyer. John Preston married Sally Carruthers, and together they produced 7 children. In 1856, during delivery of what would have been their 8th child, Sally and her newborn infant both died. Preston was distraught. He appears to have been very much in love with Sally, and on her tombstone he wrote fervent words of devotion. John sent his younger children to live with his sister, Elizabeth Cook, in Cumberland County. A few years later, Elizabeth Cook would provide a home for General Robert E. Lee on the same farm following Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Severely depressed, John Preston turned for comfort to his friend Thomas Jackson, who had suffered the loss of his own wife Eleanor, who was Margaret Junkin's sister. And although Jackson was an instructor at VMI, he lived with the Junkin in-laws on the campus of Washington College. Margaret, was living there also. Her keen intelligence and sharply honed mind allowed her to join in the evening conversations with her father, George Junkin, president of the college, and the 2 BMI professors, John Preston and Thomas Jackson. Maggie described herself as an old maid at age 37, but she was not a retiring personality. She never took a back seat in any gathering. Maggie quickly became a source of consolation for John. She had been Sally's close friend. The grieving quartet bonded. Jackson and Maggie became so close that they would have married except that their religion, Presbyterian, outlawed it at the time because of their in-law relationship. There was no such restriction applying to Maggie's relationship with Major John Preston. John and Maggie fell in love. Dr. Junkin, the father, was delighted. He admitted and admired this wealthy, mature lawyer-turned-teacher. He urged his hesitant daughter to marry, insisting in his characteristic dictatorial style that the very finger of God is pointing you in that direction. She consented, but trouble arose immediately. Major Preston set the wedding date for August 2, and Maggie said no. Why? Because it had been the date of John and Sally's anniversary. Astonished at Maggie's insubordination, the alpha male asserted his superiority by storming, "You will marry me on that date or not at all." Calmly, little 5-foot Maggie replied, "John, it's been nice knowing you. Bye." And she walked away. This big outdoorsman was dumbfounded. Major J.T.L. Preston, aristocrat, had met his match. He no doubt assumed that since August 2 had been a good date for the first marriage, why not repeat it for the second and have only one anniversary to remember? Well, Preston was a man in a man's world. He did not know it, but he was definitely in need of some sensitivity training. Only through the desperate intervention of Thomas Stonewall Jackson and Dr. Jumpin did a compromise finally emerge. The date was reset for August 3. Maggie's father officiated the wedding. The groom was grim. He had lost his first fight. By all accounts, the marriage developed into a happy relationship. Henry Bowley, writing 80 years later, says, "Doubtless the most distinguished couple ever to have lived in Lexington was Colonel Preston and his talented wife, Mara Jumpin. What made them distinguished? Well, she was the, quote, poet laureate of the South, and he claimed distinction in a multitude of achievements." Preston visited the community of Oxford and the church often as a guest of Bob Hamilton on Buffalo. And Bob Hamilton is the man who helped name Buffalo Creek Valley out there Snakefoot Territory. His prize-winning hounds could be heard sounding among those hills, coon hunting on long moonlit nights. In Lexington, John Preston conceived, promoted, and named the Virginia Military Institute. He taught Latin at VMI throughout the last half of his life. With Colonel Francis Smith, Preston was in charge of the historic execution of John Brown at Harper's Ferry. He helped his friend Stonewall Jackson establish and teach in the first of its kind a school for slaves right here in Lexington. As a colonel, he commanded troops in the Civil War. His son, Frank, was captain of the cadets in the Battle of New Market. John Preston was chief protagonist and final victor in what we call the Skinner War, which a fiery Scottish parson in Lexington Presbyterian Church attempted to sue his own church officer. Colonel Preston was also generous. When a fellow elder died poor, Preston had him buried in the Preston plot under a large stone engraved with "John B. Lyle, truest friend, bravest man, and best Christian ever known." During and after the war, Preston taught at VMI without pay, and he lived to see one of his sons rise to the position of pastor of the Lexington Presbyterian Church. Preston considered himself superior in the art of loving. He wrote, "The man who knows better than I do how to appreciate and return the love of a noble woman, I do not expect to meet." His assessment of himself sounds strange to our ears, considering his lack of understanding about women's regard for their own wedding anniversary. His wife, Maggie, had forgiven him for that. She wrote unusually tender love poems about her feelings for John. There were moments, however, when Maggie's patience was tested, as when he failed to return with his soldiers after a mission. She suffered awful apprehension for another full day and night, convinced that he was disabled or dead. And finally, he showed up, lamely explaining, "We failed to find Yankees, so we went deer hunting instead." So we have another clear case showing John's need for sensitivity training. He could have spared her needless suffering, and she commented in her writings of his occasionally, lack of empathy. They are buried, the Prestons, in what used to be called the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery in Lexington, and they lie beneath a towering tree called the Preston Oak. The old patriarch John dominated all his life, had now had more than 100 years to get reconciled to the odd fact that that massive tree is not named for John Preston. It is in the book of Historic Trees of Virginia as the Margaret Junction Preston oak. In life as in death, the little lady was a match for her powerful husband. That is Colonel John Preston.